15 years ago, I don't think that there wasn't very many owners reps out there. They were just generally working for, a few people like Larry Ellison and all. But now it's become, most ubiquitous with the larger projects. So an owner's rep is the way that we approach it at Whiteside Management is we feel that an owner needs to have, an advocate who really is only purely aligned with what their goals and priorities are, and have that overlay so that it works with the whole team, the architect, the contractor, and, as you know, dozens of other professionals, such that we can all, at the end of the day, in essence, be owners' reps. Mm-hmm. Because, really what we're trying to do is perform a service for an owner, and the owners are not experts in this, and we all are. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of like to use the analogy, and there's a couple of different analogies. I tell people, the owners, I say, think about it, if you're going to spend 10, 20, 30, 50 or more millions of dollars, think of it as a small business. And if you were, or it's almost a large business, if you were going to have a business, you would, and you say your architect is your, chief product designer, like Johnny Ives would be for Apple. Mm-hmm. And your contractor is your production manager. But you don't have any CFO or CEO to run the business. And so that's kind of the role we typically try to play.
I see.
Another way to look at it is, using a music analogy, is if you were an orchestra, then in a sense we act sort of as the conductor, although I would like to, conductor is setting us up on a pedestal, which we're clearly not in this case. But if you were an egoless conductor, you have to know a little bit at least, or even to some degree, a lot about every different instrument, but you're not an expert in every one, and you don't need to be. Mm-hmm. What you need to do is make sure that the communication and the harmonies and everything is working together, and the tempo is all right, which could be the schedule. So there's a lot of ways to make that analogy work, but I like that because, we're up there, we're looking for, if that clarinet is a little out of tune, then let's get it aligned or something along those lines. Another one is a little more background-ish, is if we were a stage manager in a play. So those kind of are the things. But I would like to say that we do look at a project is kind of an entity unto itself. There's the architect, there's the owner, and there's the contractor. But you combine them all, and then you have a project. And we kind of look at as a project almost spherically. And what we try to do sometimes, or have to do sometimes, is we're trying to keep the owner from negatively affecting their own project. I think that's sometimes one of the more useful things that we do.
Okay, actually, on that specific note, can you expand on that? Like, what would be some examples of that? Why would that take place?
Well, it could be because of unrealistic expectations, or more often than not, it's a resetting of the expectations because things change. But really, in my experience, the best owner is one that is well informed and educated, and frankly, is not particularly coddled by hiding information from them. So some of this information is not good information that they want to hear. It's not pleasant. Like by the way, you thought you were going to get in there for Christmas, and you're not getting in there until Easter or whatever the case may be. But sometimes owners who are, we've had owners that are, very experienced, successful business people who work in a different industry where they are really, it's all about schedule and budget and everything. And the creation of a custom home does not lend itself to that type of production mentality. You have to, it's constantly in a state of creation, as you know, as architects, and you need to be very supportive of that. And sometimes that drives owners crazy who really were expecting that, I'm going to spend this much money and move in on this date. And, or, yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that last point you made, that's interesting that some folks from whatever business backgrounds and expertise they have, it's about budget and schedule, as you kind of outlined, and it's a very, very structured and controlled way of looking at things and doing things. But it's an interesting point that any home project or any building project really, there's a lot that's outside of the control of even the professionals who are involved. We were speaking with an architecture office the other day, a very, very, very good one, and they made an interesting comment, which was, we don't really have control over the schedule, which is an interesting remark to hear from the professional you're hiring to be your expert.
Not very reassuring.
Yeah, but I think they were highlighting a few things, right? During design, obviously, the client has a huge hand in how the schedule goes, if there's more revisions or more changes, or how long they take to get back to the architect. And then during construction, obviously, it's this, I forget how you put it, the project is always undergoing a creation. So you don't, almost every day or week by week, something's going to morph and change. And I guess the mentality you have to have really is sort of being able to roll with the punches and to surf the wave as best as you can, because the projects do have kind of a life on their own sometimes.
Agreed. And I mean, really the key mitigating factor here to the expectation resetting is clear communication, and clear communication comes with maintaining information flow, as you understand. I mean, really, the schedule is not so much as a contractor is unable to ramp up and get the work done according to how they want to do it. They actually want to do the job as quickly as they can because they make more money.
Yeah.
But it's because they're not getting the information. So, I mean, a lot of our OAC meetings and the formation and the way that we do the minutes, when we do the minutes, we used to always do the minutes. Now it's not so much anymore, but we use those minutes to highlight information flow. We never end a minuted article in it without an absolute date and an absolute person who is responsible or party who's responsible. You've been at meetings and you ask somebody, well, so when am I going to get those colors for that? And they say, oh, soon. That's not good information to work with.
I was wondering, is there like a specific scale or type of project that would require having an owner's rep, or would be beneficial to have an owner's rep on?
Versus not.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, because I don't know. This is a wild guess on my part, but my bet is that if we're talking about projects, say, over $5 million, let's say over $10 million and up, my bet is that probably at over 50% of those have owners reps these days. However, that leaves 50% that don't. So, in the past, historically, architects were functioning in this role of owners reps, and they were architects from the 50s, 60s, 70s, had a emphasis on construction management. I don't think that's the case so much anymore. And frankly, it isn't. I don't think it's the desire of the architects to be a construction manager. They want to do architecture. So in that particular case, projects have gotten far more complicated and far more expensive. The very first project we did was back in 2006 and 7. It was started, and it was a beautiful house with top grade architects and interior designers in Kent Woodlands, and we did it in 18 months for $750 a foot. Wow. I ran into that owner the other day, who actually he was the guy who used to own the design center, and he said, if I was going to build my house now, he said, how much would it cost me? And I said, it would cost you, believe it or not, it would probably cost you at least $2,100 to $2,500 a foot, and it would definitely take at least 28 to 30 months to build.
He's like, wow, I got a deal of a lifetime.
Yeah, he was pretty happy to hear that.
So you kind of answered it, but one of the questions also is, for clients who are listening, they understand there's an architect, they understand there's a contractor. Like, why can't the architect perform the same duties as the owner's rep? Why can't the architect be the one who's sort of the liaison, the conductor, the person who's kind of overseeing everything from a high level?
Well, you're stretching the architect's bandwidth then on your project, because he's also, let's just say that typically nowadays, the architect would at least be managing the soft cost consultant team, and then on top of that, he's managing the contract for the contractor. He's managing all the change orders. He's managing all the interior design issues, and he's putting forth a budget and the billing. And maybe if it's a bank finance job, he's performing all of that bank financing paperwork that happens every month, doing all the special inspections. Who's going to take care of the course of construction insurance? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So if the architect was doing that, it would be expected that either they would be doing that or the owner would be doing that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of owners these days hear horror stories about going down the rabbit hole of a construction project and how disrupting it was to their lives. I just don't think that they're getting advice from either their financial advisors, their home office, their CPA, their attorney. Frankly, those are all people that are referrals to us that didn't used to be. To bring in an owner's rep, because it is, in a sense, from their perspective, it's a risk management person for this big expenditure.
I see. And so when would be a good time for a client to bring on an owner's rep? It sounds like from the very beginning. It sounds like actually it might be the first person you bring on.
Yeah, I mean, it's as early as possible. Generally speaking, it's, people, they want to build a house, and maybe they already have a property and they're going to demolish their property or remodel their property extensively, and they start interviewing architects. And then as they get into the constant questions and information and everything else going on, they realize that they may need an owner's rep, or they heard a friend that used one and it was okay. But in some cases, we get involved even before the owners have purchased the property. Mm-hmm. This usually comes as a referral from what we call home office companies like, Iconic and the like. And they manage these clients' global financial situation. And the one thing they don't do, I mean, those people, I think they even get personnel, cooks, personal assistants, babysitters, mm-hmm. Jets and everything, but they don't have internally an expertise in construction.
Sure.
And so we have often been brought in by those people managing, wealthy people's financial lives to keep them from, making a mistake, getting into a contract that doesn't make any sense down the road, and also to keep a focus on a budget. I'll give you an example. And, architects like to quote a budget for the cost of construction. If they, but we like to talk about an all-in budget, which includes all of the soft costs, which includes maybe the financing costs, and those things could add up to another 30% or more.
Yeah.
So when an owner says, okay, well, I want to spend $10 million. Well, okay, but that means you're going to be building a house for $7 million mm-hmm. if you want to spend $10 million. And that gets miscommunicated quite often.
We've talked about that numerous times. The term construction cost is kind of thrown around very, quickly in a lot of conversations. And one of the first things we always ask when we're talking to potential clients is like, what is your budget? But is that your entire budget, or is that for construction? Because a lot of people don't even know what construction cost includes. It's like, wait, so does that include? What does construction cost mean?
Does that include your fee?
It's a whole conversation, but it's easy to gloss over.
Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate, we start building an all-in budget.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you could say we were kind of a buzzkill to the process, but we believe that having that information out there, and there's so much more than just the construction costs and everything else there. These days it's a lot of entitlements is a big deal. PG&E, nobody puts PG&E into their budget, but you can see PG&E costs in the $500,000 range these days.
PG&E is Pacific Gas and Electric for people who are not in California.
Yeah, so, correct. The utilities out here. Neighbors. Neighbors are a big concern. And do architects want to go out there and debate with the neighbors about stuff? I don't think so. At least if I was an architect, I wouldn't want to. So, and I mean, that's one of the things we handle. In certain neighborhoods in San Francisco, if you're not very communicative with the neighborhood association, you're going to have problems. And we know people that have done projects in Bernal Heights or Diamond Heights or Noe Valley that have spent 3 to 5 years just to get a permit, get it through the process of planning and the objections and everything else. So it's, there's so much more complex issues that take place in modern construction.
Do you include some contingency if you have to pay off your neighbors so they let you do what you got to do? We've heard some stories. So.
Yeah, well, the word contingency is an interesting one because, we've always put, there's the contractor has a contingency, but we have an owner's contingency as well. And in the past, it was like an automatic. Okay, you add 10% to your all-in budget, and that's your contingency, and you can do the whole project for that amount, hopefully. But that doesn't apply much anymore. I mean, the contingency we can wipe out a contingency in the first 6 months from unforeseen issues. And often they are neighbor issues.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I think even just the contingency point highlights an earlier message you kind of conveyed, which was the projects being always undergoing creation. And you could see with the complexity just of the few examples you've given of the neighbors and approvals and everything else.
Process,
how complex things have become, which would warrant this special individual a dedicated role to dealing with all of this. Because I think to answer your question, and then the architect listening would say, it's not my desire to be speaking with neighbors. That's not what I was put on this earth to do,
Yeah. Well, when I got involved in this, this was a complete accident, but we'll maybe go down there later. But my point is, I came out, I had run a commercial construction company for 20 plus years in San Francisco. And, as a commercial contractor, it was such a different way of doing things because typically before you start a job, you have a full set of plans and you know exactly what it's going to cost. And it's not, and really your priority is budget and get that person moved into their office so they can start making money. The quality part of the triangle is, usually on the bottom. But in the case of, building your dream, the place that you want to live in, that's going to be a foundation for your family life and for your married life, your social life, etc. I have never done a project that was fully developed or even close to fully developed when we break ground, because if we did that, well, first of all, I don't think it'd be practical. And this is a change of heart on my part, because I thought I was going to come in and convert the way residential was done to the way the commercial was done, and I've made about maybe a 0.5% difference in that aspect. But also it's part of a lot of the architects that we work with. They want to see these things before they can really put their finger of certainty on how they want the design to look. They want it to come into 3D sometimes so that they can really feel it, at least, in terms of the light outside. The space is, okay, that is really what I want over here, and so on and so forth.
I see. Interesting. I was wondering also in terms of your, I guess, responsibilities, but more maybe your role, how much is it to do with managing all of the things you mentioned and the technical aspects and managing the professionals versus being a sort of a manager of the client on behalf of the professionals, if that makes sense? Because it sounds like you're sort of the bridge between both sides.
Yes, that's a good way to put it, because we're not, I think there was a point in time when an owner's rep was viewed as the new sheriff in town.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Get out of here.
Yeah. And I've heard people comment that they think, oh, you're just a bunch of hard asses, and you come in and, you're the person that says no to every change order and no to all the design issues. And that's just couldn't be further from the truth. There are times when we have to get involved in a project that's gone off the rails, and we come in the middle, which is the worst nightmare situation conceivable. And we're really unable to be effective, but we have to come in and make a change or something like that. So that, I think, on the rare occasion that's happened, that has colored our reputation a little bit.
I see. Yeah.
What we're really there to do is to enable and really I consider contractors a creative party as well as the architect. Especially these high-end contractors, they really love what they're building, and they have an eye for it, and they're participatory to the sense of design and the end result. As a matter of fact, they're very responsible for the end result. We look for areas where they could use our help to allow them to be able to concentrate more on the design, more on the my camera's slipping a little bit there. Okay. And so I kind of like to tell people, what we are is we're kind of an efficiency expert. If we see that things are bogging down because of information flow, then we hone in on that, and we figure out, if you don't have the bandwidth to get this information, then let's expand this to a different, bring in more resources, or here's an example. Oftentimes, the interior designer and the architect have not really well-defined roles as it relates to like the finished products or the cabinetry or the, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And sometimes the architect who was thinking, okay, well, the interior designer is going to provide all these elevations, and then they find out that the interior designer doesn't really do drawings. Then we go, whoa, okay, we got a big problem here. And, we may farm that out to a firm that specializes in just doing those drawings, but we got to get in front of that early. So we know we have like a cheat sheet list of things that have gone wrong. We after every project, we do a download and we add to our cheat sheet list, and we bring it up right from the first meeting. We're saying, we don't bring it up to everybody in the room, but we check the list as we go along and say, okay, this happened on this job. 2 years ago that we didn't get across the finish line with on, because anyway, so on and so forth. So yeah, we try to stay in front of it.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when you're brought on projects early, do you help also the client kind of assemble the team, or maybe advise on, like, I don't know, which architect or interior designer is a good match for what they're trying to do? Like, how much are you involved in those early phases?
Well, typically, I would say that it's rare that we are asked to present the architect to the client, but it has happened. As a matter of fact, it's happening more and more. They show us their little Filofax of pictures of what kind of architecture they like,
sure,
or they're thinking about, or they'll take us to some of their friends' house, or obviously these people that are building a 20, 30, 40, $50 million house are fairly well traveled. I've had people show me pictures of architecture that they found in some remote area of New Zealand, for example. And they'll say, this is the kind of thing I want. And then once we know that, I think architects these days are far more specialized than they are generalists in the style of what they, like to do or focused on doing. And so then we put together a list, and we have some interviews and set it up, and then they make a selection. And after that, then there's the consultants list. Well, actually, there's two. There's the architect for the house, and there's the architect for the landscape. Those are,
right.
Sure,
two equally, or you could argue they were equally important depending on the house.
Yeah.
But then there's the supports people below that, the structural, the civil, and the list goes on and on these days. The acoustic, the waterproofing, the lighting designer, I'm sure it's pretty soon there's going to, here's a new one. The air quality control person.
Oh, really?
That's in the last 3 years, we have spent so much time and energy designing systems that have never been designed before for a house that can work during fire season for smoke and smog and whatnot. And it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do because, you're trying to force air into a situation that needs to be clean, that has to be by having these group of HEPA filters that then you don't get any airflow. It's really been difficult. It's like having a clean room, literally in houses. And so that's the latest thing.
I was going to say, with your commercial contracting background, did you do any like hospitals by chance, or something like that?
We used to build clean rooms.
Really?
And that's such a specialized, deal. But you don't want to have a house that's a clean room. So there are a few mechanical engineers now that are starting to put this together, and there is new equipment that's just coming, online now that will begin to handle this need. But it wasn't. Safe rooms.
I was going to say that's another one, right?
Yeah, there's another one, and so the list just goes. It used to, when I did my first job, I think we had 11 consultants, and now it wouldn't be unusual to have 25 to 30.
Oh my goodness.
Consultants on a job.
That's just so many people. That's so many people.
Yeah. And then you got to orchestrate those people and make sure they're all communicating, and one of the things that we do is when we assemble a team, the architect ordinarily really likes to work with a particular structural engineer, a particular landscape person, a particular civil person. Mm-hmm. They don't care so much about the acoustical or whatever, but the lighting designer is very important to them. Mm-hmm. But sometimes these people, we find that we keep track of everybody's bandwidth in the industry, because it's very important. If one of those people falls out of the loop, and it can trickle down to the whole schedule and the job. And we pay a lot of attention to bandwidth capabilities, both in the consultants and also on the contractors. Because you know, if we know a contractor's landed us, you know, 3 or 4 big jobs, and they happen to be putting a proposal on this job here, and we know they're not going to have any experienced superintendents, then you want to know that, even though that might have been the preferred contractor initially. But over the period of time that this process developed, suddenly they're not really the best preferred contractor. And it's good to know before you get under contract with that. And you end up with a whole new team that they just hired fresh off the street.
Right.
Fresh off the street.
I didn't recognize you. Who are you?
Yeah.
That's an interesting point, because that's a very, very high level view that, again, I don't know who else would have that. Like, a client wouldn't typically have that information or that knowledge, or be even thinking to think that way, nor would any of the professionals like the architect or the contractor. I was wondering, for someone who's considering, you know, using you guys as their owner's rep, or owner's rep in general, how specific and how detailed or how involved do you get throughout the process? I don't know how this could be explained. Like, are you CC'd in every email between everybody, or are you there just kind of touching base once a week to make sure things are on schedule? Like, how does that engagement go, or does it vary from project to project?
Well, I am. So we know all about the contractors, the architects, the engineers, and everybody in town, but we don't know really what the other owners reps do.
Fair enough.
Kind of yeah. I mean, and frankly, you know, whereas in 2012 I could tell you the names of all the owners reps in town, and now my bet is, I bet you there's upwards of 200 or 300 owners reps just in the Bay Area.
Wow.
And I don't even know half of them, but I'm hearing about a different one every day. But in our case, my philosophy, and it came out of my contracting days, was to be comprehensive. That doesn't mean that, you know, we don't do design, we don't do architecture, we don't do engineering, but we want to know, at least to some degree, what everybody is doing and how the communication goes. Do we study the structural plans? No, but we look at them. And do we have conversation? We want to attend the conversation that's going on between the structural engineer and the mechanical engineer and the electrical engineer, because something that's going to come down the line is the electrical contractor's going to say, oh, I didn't know this I-beam was in here. I got to give you a change order for $100,000. And, you know, we want to get in front of that kind of thing early on. So I would say more often than not, we get probably 75% of the emails on a project going back and forth. It's overwhelming. I spend my weekends clearing out my email. I practically don't have a life because of it, but
you need an owner's rep for yourself to take care of.
Yeah, I know, I do. We also, I mean, we staff a job. I don't know if you didn't ask this question, but I'll tell you how we staff a job, and I think that would help.
Yeah.
So we always put on a job. We always have an assistant project manager and a project manager. We assign it to the project manager, and then, you know, and it's kind of a fine art, because certain project managers are a better fit for this contractor, this architect, and this owner. And whereas somebody else who did great on one job wouldn't be a good fit for that team. So we have to, that's why, I mean, I don't know how people with 2 or 3 employees are able to be scalable in that sense. But anyway, and then we always have a principal. I have 2 partners, Steve Rosenberg and Tom Catalano, and those guys are actually in the process of taking over and running the company as I start to take a different role, not as active in the day-to-day managing of the business. But we all are project managers on some projects, because we've just got into that position, It was like 3 years ago, and we don't want to pass it off or hand it off. But we have either a principal above the project manager in the APM, or we are a principal doing the project management. And then we have an accounting staff that, because we're heavy on accounting and the financial management of the job and contracts.
Yep. Is there anything, I mean, it really kind of feels like the owner's rep is the, I don't know how to describe it, but kind of an elastic amoeba shaped that kind of fills the cracks that inevitably exist in all these projects to help the thing run more smoothly. Because with the sheer amount of information and people, for the large projects, the weight of it just can't be held up by just the classic architects and the contractor.
Well, it really can't. I mean, I don't know when it's going to stop getting more complicated.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to need an owner's rep to, like you said. But yes, another analogy is, if you played Little League Baseball, there was when you had a 10th person on the team, that was a rover, and he could go to any position.
Right.
That, he thought about it. And in a sense, I sometimes tell the people, we're the rover. If we think if it's a little weak over there in left field along the line, then we'll go over and get in that position. And so if we, I mean, let's just say for budgetary reasons, you maybe didn't hire the most expensive structural engineer. So we might know in advance that person is going to be possibly light on the details or not be able to provide the information. So we work with that person. We try to make them focus on our job as a priority and make the other jobs fall to the wayside.
Right.
But it's kind of an art in the sense that, the beauty of what we do is that we have been behind the scenes for dozens and dozens of architectural practices and dozens, if not hundreds, of contractors. So we know all of the people. We hear what they're doing. The first call I get from a contractor is, "Hey, I got a crew that I need to put to work in the South Bay starting in April. What do you got? You got anything down that way?" So then I'll start to get the feel for, okay, this is what's going on. And then I know their subs. So I know their subs have a little hole. And so that's sort of the not so technical part of being an owner's rep, is you have to keep your ear to the ground and really know what's going on.
Yeah, it seems like, again, at the high level and even the detailed level of within a project, it's a very kind of reactive role sometimes. You're adapting as per project needs, per day, per week, per whatever else.
You would hope it could be a little more proactive,
sure.
But you're right. Sure. I think the real, more honest way to put it is the speed of our reactivity
right.
is the best we could hope for sometimes. Although one problem I've had in the last few years is sometimes an owner will think that we do know every single detail about a project, including, where that drip edge on that exterior window was supposed to be or something like that. And I've had a few clients come back to me and say, "Well, how come you didn't, our steam shower clouds up the whole room, and I think that's something you should have known about." And
yeah.
we are hoping and expecting that the professionals are taking care of all that stuff, but theoretically we might have known about that. We do try, one of the main things that I like to do is when I'm listening to, or I go on job sites and I walk around, I talk to the subs. I have a guy, he's known as the Donut King, because he shows up on job sites with a box of donuts, and then everybody talks to him, and he knows every single workers on that job site's name, and they go, "Hey Craig, how you doing?" And then he can start talking to me. He said, "Hey, what's going on here? How come you don't have so many guys here today?" "Oh man, then
right.
Hey, get those guys back on our job." You know, I mean, that kind of
donuts. Oh, you
That's
see,
the key.
it
That's
seems
the
like it's
key.
just donuts, but no, it's more than
Yes.
that.
yeah. These days, I'm sure it's French pastries, but still.
There is a lot going around in San Francisco, that's
The
for
French
sure.
pastries?
Yeah.
Maison
Yeah.
Nico.
I was wondering, so you said you were a contractor for many years and then switched to this business. Like, how did you make the switch? Is there any training that, you can, I don't know, do online, or any school for what you're doing today?
Yeah, how do you become a
How do you
qualified?
prep for that?
Yeah.
Well, there is, you can get a construction management degree, which
Yeah.
is, San Luis Obispo, Chico, and several other colleges have them. But those are two where we see people come in and apply for jobs where they've gotten a degree. And but in my particular case, I sold my construction company to my two partners, which is kind of what I'm in the process of doing now with my two partners. And there was a transitionary period, a 5-year period. And the reason I did it was I was involved in other businesses. I had, well, that's another long story, but I wanted to concentrate on some other businesses I was involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those businesses did not do well in the recession. So while I was waiting for my ship to either come in or sink, I had an old client who was a developer, who, again, he was one of the owners of the design center. And I had been in the design center my entire career.
Okay.
Interestingly, I had never done a residential job the whole time I was there. But he called me up and he said, I'm going to build this house in Kentfield, and why don't you build it for me? And I said, that's like asking your dentist to remove your appendix. He could probably do it, but you might not want it. But I tell you what I will do. I'll help you find a contractor, because that I'm good at. And so that was the first time I had ever gotten a peek behind the bidding and the financing and the process on a high-end residential, because I did literally thousands and thousands of commercial projects, and I had never seen what was going on there. And we were working for 2-3% overhead and profit.
Wow.
3, 4, 5% general conditions.
Wow.
Very small margins. And the first glimpse I got at a contractor's bid, it was I added everything up, and I said, holy mackerel, you're at 31%. I spent 21 years working for peanuts. I made a mistake. Anyway, it's not actually that simple. It doesn't
Sure.
extrapolate exactly like that. But yeah. And so then I went around and talked to all these different contractors, and everybody said, oh, we're booked for 4 years. We don't want to do anything. And I was used to bidding jobs because I came from a commercial background.
Right.
And then Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. I don't know if you remember that day, but and I went to the owner. I said, "Are you going to go forward?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going forward." And the next day, I got called from 10 general contractors wanting to get in on this job.
Yeah.
And so I put it out to bid, and surprise, there was an enormous decrease in the budget for the same scope. And then he said, the guy said, well, listen, I want you to run this job for me. So I did it, and I started to attend the weekly meetings. I put together, I was used to doing minutes as a contractor. So I took over the minutes, and in the contractor and the architect were just horrified that I was involved. But by about a third of the way through the job, they were saying, hey, you know what? Actually, you're making my life easier. I don't have to chase this stuff down. I don't have to go explain to the owner about the change order, or I don't have to go get the surveyor out here, or I don't have to go to the town and try to get that second permit out. And anyway, so the next thing you know, they were recommending me for jobs. And that's when I hired Steve. And boom, after that, we, every 3 months we needed a new person, and we grew really fast.
That's incredible. A moment ago, you were talking about construction management, and people can go to study at Cal Poly and Chico and wherever else for that. But just to kind of clarify, what an owner's rep does is not exactly the same thing as a construction manager. It's not.
As a matter of fact, when I first started this business, I called it Whiteside Construction Management, and then we changed it because it wasn't an applicable term, because we were with that description, we were viewed as being a contractor at risk, so to speak, and standing above the contractor, but still doing the general contract, which is not what we do. So yeah, it's the thing about it being an owner's rep is there's no way that you could get somebody right out of school or even pick up. We've never really been successful at getting project managers from construction companies or architects that want to do it without a certain level of training. So early on, I just committed to the fact that I'm going to have a farm team here and train them. And we were not afraid to hire young, inexperienced people because we had a good training program for them. And we were in the office 5 days a week, or when we weren't on job sites. And every time a person was on a job site, a senior person was with them, telling them how to do it, showing them what to do. There was a ton of instruction. I told these people, when I'm hiring you, I'm going to invest $50,000, $100,000 in your education. Hopefully you're not going to leave as soon as you know what you're doing. But for the first year, I can't really bill for you because you're going to be in an apprentice program. And
so what are some, go ahead. I was going to ask, what are some of the things that have to be learned by someone new? Is it mostly like the technical information, the connections to different people, or is it
handling,
knowing, relationship, knowing how to work with people, all of it?
Well, it's all those things. And
sure.
The funny thing is it's important, but it's the least important is actually understanding the means and methods of assembling a construction project. It's more important that they understand first of all, they have to learn our proprietary budgeting program, which is super complicated. I don't even think I understand it. But it's not only just for budgeting, but we've gathered a history. So we have a long history of data that's very useful for us going forward. And then they have to learn how to take minutes. The first thing that, because we use the minutes as a management tool. It's not just a management tool, but it's also an agenda for going forward. It's also a record that could turn into a legal tool if need be. And as you know, I'm sure, and for the first 10 years of this business, we always insisted on taking the minutes. Now, if a contractor really wants to take the minutes, frankly, we let them, and then we just edit their minutes. And to be honest, it's probably, I don't see us taking minutes more than 50% of the time going forward, but it was an important tool. And that's the first thing that they would learn. They would write the minutes. Then that project manager or myself or Steve or Tom or somebody, we would go through and we'd say, there's not enough detail here, or you weren't specific enough here, or you've got to correct this timeline here, or be sure and get, then if you control the minutes, you can always slip in something that wasn't there at the meeting, just so you can make sure everybody's, if it was forgotten, or I'm not trying to say manipulating the facts, but it gives you one last shot at getting the thing, that, and sometimes the owners might read the minutes. So they always get the minutes.
Yeah. It's one of the challenges and one of the biggest differences between large scale homes, which is the ones that you're describing, versus smaller projects, is a lot of the infrastructure that is really essential for a large scale home. A lot of that dissipates when you do smaller work, and that can be very frustrating would be one word to use. And the meeting minutes is one of them. I don't like it when we have a meeting and other folks, like someone's not taking notes, or even if it's a phone call and they don't take notes. I'm like, hey man, you got to take care of your shit.
Well, because we had this conversation. Then it becomes like everybody forgot where things were left off. Yeah. There's nothing that you can backtrack to if you need to. So there is a use for it.
Yeah, it's the documentation is overwhelming, but it's important. It's like I'm sure we've all built something that was sketched on a cocktail napkin at one time or another, but that's pretty risky.
It's super risky.
Every time I hear that, I just roll my eyes and I'm like, you just got lucky if it turned out good.
Until you're one in the 1,000.
I was wondering if, let's say we have one of our listeners who is watching or listening to this interview and they are, I don't know, like in Utah or New York, and maybe they want to hire you guys for a project. Like, what is how far can you expand? How far can you go to be hired on projects?
Why do you ask that question? Because we are all over the world at the moment.
Really?
And it's interesting. Well, here's where we're in New York, we're in Los Angeles, we're in Costa Rica, we're in French Polynesia, we're in Aspen. I'm surprised we're not in Jackson Hole. We keep getting almost brought in. I actually fought going outside of the Bay Area because of the amount of time and the bandwidth that would rob from what we could do here for our clients, because obviously there's no lack of work in the Bay Area. Yeah. But we found that a client who has a house here and then wants to build a house in Nantucket, there is a good reason for us to participate in that. And, we built this beautiful house in Nantucket for a client from probably 2013 to 2017 was when it went on, pre-Zoom days.
Oh my goodness.
So they were, but so my guy who was running it, he went back there once a month. And so it was a little bit more expensive for the client to do that, but it was a large, complicated job. And it was worth his peace of mind because we knew what the client was expecting. And so we had a history with them. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it worked out very well. And then nowadays with Zoom, there's aspects about Zoom that is really wonderful. And and I'm not a greatest fan of Zoom because of the factor that, you become dependent on it and you never see somebody in the flesh anymore. And there's a lot of communication that takes place in a room when you're sitting around a table with people that isn't Zoomable.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can call up plans, we use Bluebeam, we use PlanGrid, and you can refer to items, you can do a punch list, you can talk about specific, details that really might be problematic in a heartbeat by calling it up on Zoom and talking about it. So now we do projects. If we were to do that same project in Nantucket, we would probably go out there once a month for the first 3 or 4 months. And then after that, we might not go out there, but every 3 months.
Yeah.
It just depends. We have a project in Aspen. It's like a project that's going to be different uses, agricultural, hospitality, major home for the owner on a big piece of property. And so this takes all different disparate team management. So in that case, the guy's going out there every 2 weeks, but Aspen's easy to get to.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's quite feasible, actually. I mean, if it's only once a month.
Yeah, I mean, I just got an email just before this meeting from an architect in San Francisco who says I have a a project in Scottsdale. Either do you know a owner's rep in Scottsdale, or are you willing to do it? And to be honest with you, if I knew an owner's rep in Scottsdale, I'd say, you know, it's always probably a little better to go with the local expert if they're good.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an odd beast being an owner's rep. If you don't have 10 or 15 years under your belt, I'd question your abilities.
Well, actually, on that note, because the role and the title of owner's representative and the way that you're describing is relatively new, I have heard and seen, and maybe you've seen this as well, of people who don't have much experience that would directly allow them to be an effective owner's rep from day zero. And they jump into it because I think on the one hand, the owner's representative as a title sounds like something anybody could do as long as you're good at managing people and you're thorough and detailed. Well, then I can do it. Like what's the magic ingredients that are needed beyond that? And I've heard of people who jump into it and they say, "Oh, I'm an owner's rep for this project, and it's an $10 million whatever dollar build." And like, well, what's your background? Oh, it's in this or that. I'm like, how's that going to possibly work? You know nothing about construction or architecture.
Yeah, I find that sometimes with people that have been in property management or real estate, getting involved, and they may have built one or two projects themselves, but yeah, I mean, there are so many. I will say this: there's a lot more qualified owners reps out there than there were 10 years ago.
Sure.
And the real question is, I think we all have different styles, and there might be an owner's rep that would work well with one team that wouldn't work well with another team. And as I mentioned before, but you have to have seen a lot of things go wrong before you can prevent them from happening. And that just takes time.
Right.
So are you most of the time the person who brings the bad news to the client? Like, how do you handle those things?
Unfortunately, yes. That is one of the, I feel it's our responsibility. I mean, the client is looking for us to be the succinct but truthful purveyor of the information on their project. As you know, if you're on a project that's going to last for 30 months and it's going to cost $30 million, you're thinking it's going to cost $30 million. Every month you get a change order or a bunch of change orders. And you think, how could that be? Or, well, nowadays it's because of cost escalation. These contracts now have a cost escalation clause in them, which I never saw until the last 2 or 3 years in a contract. And so we meet with the owner and we go through them. Sometimes we ask the contractor to be there. Sometimes we ask the contractor and the architect to be there so that they can explain it. Surprise, surprise. Probably half the time it's because the owners change things. So they have some culpability. But sometimes it's because they didn't understand that they might be asking for something that was going to cost them extra money. We have when we're at meetings, we have like a red card that this is why I like to get involved in the early design development. And, sometimes owners say, well, what are we paying you for to come to the design development meeting? Well, you're paying me to hold up that red card because you told me you wanted to stick with the budget. If you said, I don't care what the budget is, then believe me, you don't need me at those meetings.
Yeah, it is actually, that's a really good point. And even zooming in on the design phases, that's one of the challenges that architects have when there's not an owner's rep is you have to, again, play both roles. And a lot of times when a client says, okay, I'm going to request this change, or I want to go a completely different direction? For most architects who are design focused, their first thought is just about the design. Okay, what does that mean for us in terms of how many hours it's going to take? What does that mean in terms of the concept? And all of these like architectural design questions. And it's very easy for that simple red card that you mentioned of saying, hey, by the way, we can do it, but it's going to cost you more money. That slips by because the focus is somewhere else, or the focus is on many other things that, you know, the architect has to think about.
Well, and, you know, I mean, really, the architect is trying to provide the best, most beautiful design possible. And so they don't want to be, you know, governed by, you know, this constant barrage of naysaying. It's no fun. And it's no fun for the owner either. So it's kind of you have to be careful, you know, you have to pick your battles.
Is there ever a case where during the design phases, when the architect is doing their work, that they interface with only you guys and never the client, and not the client directly?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly in relation to coordination efforts, I wouldn't say, they may call us up and say, you know, I'm trying to solve this design problem, and I know it's, you know, I'm trying to think of a, you know, for example, you know, like there might be a stone window ledge, and you know, maybe it's a, you know, Palladian villa or something, and they and they, you know, and they say, you know, this, wow, we just got this from our stone guy, and it's going to cost 3 times what I was expecting. Have you seen anything else that's out there? Do you have any ideas, or have you run into this before? So yeah, we talk to them. I mean, also we talk, for example, I'm on a project now where it's very early in the design stages, and the owner, this particular owner who we've worked with a lot, they go back and forth. And so the contractor, I mean, the architect was getting mixed messages. And so I called him up. I said, I'm coming to your office. We're going to sit down. We're going to go through the whole design. And I am going to be able to narrow it down into what they're really going to accept at the end of the day, because I've worked with them enough, for example.
I was curious, and you don't have to be too specific, but like, how does the fee for the services that you guys provide work? You know, like architects, it could be percentage, fixed fee, hourly, and why not? How does it typically or atypically works for your industry?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and it's morphed over time. But I will say this, that right now we work on an hourly basis, but depending, you know, I tell owners, you know, it'll take us a little while to figure out the ultimate scope of our job, because we don't know what your job is going to be and how long it's going to go, and what it is. But typically we run somewhere in the range of 3 to 4% of the hard costs on a project. That is, I wouldn't say that's an absolute, but that's more typical. And then, you know, back in the early days, we just did projects we just said, whatever the contractor's fee is, we'll charge you 3.5% or 4% or something like that. But here's a problem with that model is, you know, all of a sudden there's change orders coming in, and the owner's going, well, what's to keep you from policing the change orders when you're getting more fee on the change orders? So, you know, I mean, it's the same thing with the architecture fees that are percentage based. So we came up with this other model that said, well, we won't charge you anything on the first $1 million of change orders, because, you know, that's going to happen, and we know it's going to happen, and it really doesn't affect our time frame or whatever. But anyway, and I mean, that worked for a while, but as these jobs got more and more complex, and we ran into issues that we really couldn't have anticipated, but that we needed to be the ones to solve the problem. And I mean, I'm involved in a PG&E or utility issue in San Francisco that has gone on for almost a year. I mean, it's just the worst nightmare I've professionally ever had with a utility. And we were assured by the city that it was just going to be a slam dunk easy thing. And then the city, as you know, in San Francisco, they went through a big change, and many of those people are going to jail now. And they're completely coming from a different place, which is the CYA place in the city now. So they won't budge an inch. And PG&E has become this incredible. Well, they were always a bureaucratic nightmare, but I hope nobody from PG&E is listening to this. But
did you ever think
I
about?
love you guys. I love you. But, yeah, it's just and it's actually almost it's affected the timeline on the job by months.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which is going to be super expensive to the owner. That was unanticipated, and so I have spent hundreds of hours working on this, and I couldn't have anticipated. So there you go. I mean, there would have been a fee-based thing that we would have lost money on that job. So
yeah, but I think it's another example that points to almost the type of person a client has to be to do one of these projects. You have to be willing to take some amount of calculated risk, for sure.
Well, you need to have deep pockets.
Well, yeah, sure, of course.
Like, it's not for for tight budgets. It's a big risk.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a tight budget, I'd recommend buying a house already built. You know, you can get a beautiful house already built, right?
Yeah, there's not that many out there. So many bad houses. Yeah, but there's some good ones.
Yeah.
One question also is, you know, given your experience and the large perspective you have, and you've seen a lot of different projects and been involved with a lot of different projects, what are some of the most common mistakes or challenges that you've seen happen, you know, with all these different types of houses? Are there any key ones that always stand out as being, this is a challenge that clients should be, I was going to say, looking forward to or expecting?
Well, so I will tell you the most recent, or the ongoing challenge that has been most frustrating to clients has been the time frame.
Yeah.
They don't either want to understand, or they can't really accept that they can't get into this home as quickly as they want, because they're coming from the perspective that this is my happy spot. You know, I want to be in that home. I want to have my marriage and family and friends and everybody. And so, and the timing on building these homes has gone. We could literally build a home in 18 months back in 2010, 2012. And I'm not talking about a small home. I mean, it could be an 8,000 or 10,000 square foot home.
Wow.
But you could get the subcontractors, you could get the labor out there, and you could keep everybody focused. And, but now I would say that same project is going to take between 30 and 36 months or longer.
Wow.
And that is a big frustration. The other frustration is during the process. This is kind of interesting. I mean, owners want to be given as many options as possible. They want to see what everybody thinks is the best. And even though what they were originally showed when we did the original budget, because we did have a budget, wasn't the case. And then, you know, and then when the change order comes for, you know, $125,000 because you went with, you know, that fumed eucalyptus floor as opposed to the white oak, whatever, then it's like, well, how come I didn't know that? Why? How come I wasn't told that? Well, because we had to price it after you made that selection, and it took time. And
right,
you know, so that's an ongoing frustration for owners about the design, selection, materials process that almost always ends up in a change order.
I mean, the timeline from 18 months to 3 years is such a huge difference. I mean, it almost, like, it just in terms of life scope, You know, for
Yeah.
everyone involved, I'm thinking, of course, from the architect's perspective, like it's the kind of professional that is required to stay dedicated for that period of time, 18 months versus 3+ years. It's almost it's a fifth gear you have to go into to last that long.
Yeah, it is. The amount of work and the size of the projects has all grown exponentially over the last 10 years, and particularly in the Bay Area, but I'm sure in other parts of the country and the world. But the skilled labor which it takes to do this kind of work has not. And, you know, if you had if you were a artisan tile person or stone person and you had 10 people on your team back in 2010, you could whip out a couple of bathrooms and the kitchens in a couple of weeks. But those 10 people now are trying to split that between 5 different jobs. And so you've only got 2 guys on your job or 3 guys on your job. That is one problem. And of course, in the last few years, it's been because of getting materials, you know, from the shortage. That is by and large, I don't see that being a huge factor like it was last year at this time.
I was wondering if you guys ever worked on projects where instead of having the separate architect and contractor, you work with actual design build companies, if that's common.
Yeah, I would maybe once or twice. You know, I'm trying to. There's a contractor down in Atherton who's Peninsula, I think Peninsula Custom Home, something like that. And they do their own architecture, they do their own building.
Oh yeah.
And but we have actually been brought in as an owner's rep on a job because the owner was just confused, didn't want to deal with it anymore. It's not something that we like to do, and it's not something where we're tremendously effective.
Yeah.
We're more there to be bean counters or auditors than anything else.
Right. I mean, I think that's one of the.
So no.
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits. I mean, if you're working with a good design build company, is that it's all one big package, and this is all you need. It's a one-stop shop, and here it is.
It makes sense if the design is, you know, has an alignment with your vision, then it has a lot of efficiencies. For sure. And actually that used to be, I used to see that a lot more than I do now.
Oh really?
Yeah. I mean, there's design build subs still that are, you know, there's the mechanical and the electrical and the fire sprinkler, and those guys, you take the mechanical design at the start of the job and you throw it out the window and you go with this design build mechanical guy, and he redesigns everything so that it works to his system or his you know, equipment that he likes to use or whatever. But general contractors that do that, including the design, it's not very common.
Yeah.
Spec builders do it, of course.
Yeah. The other question is, what would be the most important piece of advice you would give to a client who's about to embark on this journey of creating a new home? Or maybe there's a few words of wisdom you can give.
I would, well, you know, I would really beg them to keep the vision of their end product in mind, because it's going to create stress. I've a statistic, and I'm not 100% certain if this is just, you know, something that somebody made up or if it's really true, but they said that the second leading cause of divorce is building or remodeling a home.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I could definitely see that being the case.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I do tell clients, you know, listen, you still going to have a family. You're going to, or, you know, let's just say you're building a home because you want to have a family, or you've already got a family and you want to move into a bigger home or a nicer home or your dream home or whatever. You know, you're still going to have that family during the 2 or 3 years of the process. And if it isn't fun, at least some of the time, then what the heck are you doing it for? So what we tell clients is, we're kind of here as fun insurance, if you will, because we're hoping that we can take some of the details off, like you don't really care about the excavation and the rebar going in the foundation. And you really don't want to have a face-to-face screaming match with your neighborhood association or things like that. And on the other hand, you want to sit there with your architect when they're sketching out this beautiful 3D vision before your eyes of what your life is going to be like. That's the fun part. Or your interior designer is showing you the latest furniture, or your art. Oh, I forgot the art consultants. That's another one that's on every job. So your art, you're talking to all these people, and that is the fun part. Now, every month we're going to have perhaps a not so fun moment where you anticipate where you're getting the change orders, you're getting the schedule delays, and so on and so forth information. There is a reality check there that needs to happen. But what we try to do up front, if an owner is willing, is we pad the budget and pad the schedule with their knowledge, but to a realistic degree from our experience, such that when we tell them, okay, this change order, there's $125,000 in change orders this month, but we had $118,000 already in the budget for it. So really, you're only going to be talking about a $7,000 deal or whatever, like that. And that is a common practice with us that, we do with owners that allow it. And I think that's a very good insurance policy for them having fun with it. We negotiate. One of the other things that we do is we negotiate the general contractor contract. Sometimes the architect's contracts too, if we get in at that time, although there's not a lot to negotiate with an architect's contract, like there is a general contractor's contract.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm building this house in Diamond Heights that we spent 6 weeks negotiating the contract with the contractor.
That's a long time.
It wore me out, and that guy had stamina. And finally, we turned it over to 2 lawyers. But I don't like to bring the lawyers in until we got the nuts and bolts out, because we have our own things that we really, and they're really not that many. We have 4 or 5 items that we really want clarified in the contract.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things we do. And just to add to this, a really important thing that nobody ever really thinks about is the insurance, a course of construction building insurance, which is a very large number these days. It can be $250,000 to $1 million. And that's a big factor, and that people just kind of, what's that? I don't know. But you have to have it, and it's required by the contract, and you have to make sure that the contractor's insurance and also everybody's insurance is aligned with the course of construction insurance. And who's going to do that if it isn't, us?
That's another really good example of one of those very specific things that, again, who's going to do that?
Well, but even hiring you guys just to monitor the schedule and the overall cost of the whole project, who else will be doing that? The client can do that. That's a huge undertaking. The architect might do that to some degree, but the contractor can also do it all. So, if I was a client about to spend $10 million, I would hire you just to make sure that this is, being covered, because it's a super important piece of information throughout.
Yeah, I think on the right size job, the architect, if they were set up for it and they had a financial department that was working for them, they could do it. But I just have to wonder why they would want to, and why would you want to pay the architect to be doing that for you? Yeah. We're actually probably not as expensive as an architect, and so.
I think, it's only speculation. I think maybe it could be in some cases control issues, but also that, again, architects X number of years ago performed much more of these duties. And so I think there's a little bit of grandfathering in, people thinking that this is what should be taking place. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, a common concern I hear from architects, though, is that, we're going to get between them and the owner. They want to have a fairly intimate relationship with the owner because they need to. Yeah. And that we stay in our lane at all times in that sense. If anything, we promote that if we see this not happening enough. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the contractor. That contractor has to have a trust, relationship of trust with the owner. Just because I trust him isn't enough. The owner has to trust him too. And so we really want those relationships to be strong. I love it when owners regularly attend OAC meetings. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I understand why they wouldn't want to. But,
sure. But I think that's actually a really, really good point, because I think the biggest fear for most architects is exactly what you said, and even more specifically, again, if it's a designer or design architecture office, anyone coming between the architect and the client when it comes to anything related to design, which is obviously much of what we do, even when it's resolving technical construction details during CA, there's always many times design implications. And architects really hate the idea of now there's this other person in the mix that's giving their design opinions in the meeting, which is, and rightfully so. It's like really stressful when now there's like a random or third person there. It just makes things really complicated.
It's another layer of approval you got to pass, in order to get the project moving forward.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I understand, some architects really don't like working with owners reps, and I understand it. And I'm just saying we make a concerted effort to, I'll use that term again, stay in our lane. In relation to that, which is why I actually think it's more beneficial if we're in some of the design development meetings, because they can see that on occasion we might we've seen something over here, like, for example, I recently heard about this new steel window manufacturing company that came out of another company and this was the best of the guys from that company, and they're probably going to be a good value for the same product. So I'll make that suggestion to an architect, but I'm not going to tell them, that crown molding is too big or whatever, or too small.
Yeah. Sort of related to a previous question is, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see clients make either at the beginning of a project or maybe throughout it?
Well, they can get burned out. The clients can lose their enthusiasm, but that's not necessarily a mistake. That's a good point, of an understandable thing. Well, I don't know if this is a mistake, but they can change their whole sense or sensibility of what their design criteria was initially. We had a client who had this whole uber modern house designed, and it took them a while to get it through planning, and lo and behold, they ended up having a child in the meantime, and they realized, after the project was started, and they thought, this uber modern isn't going to fit our new sense of being parents and a family and blah, blah, blah.
Gosh.
And we need to soften this up. And it was very difficult to do at that point. It was kind of an oversight issue, but not necessarily a mistake. I do think that sometimes the owners don't tend to pay as much attention as I would to the recommendation of their architects versus what they're seeing at their friend's house that they want to mix and match this here and there.
I'm so glad you're saying that.
And let it be known that we did not tell you to say that on the podcast. You said that on.
I know, and I'm going to probably catch hell for that, but I get frustrated because when we're having the change order meeting, they're going, oh, well, wait a minute, I didn't know that was going to be an extra. You know, my friends got it for this or whatever it was. But you know, the architect is far better at holding the vision as a whole. And sometimes owners will do something that is really not going to make any difference, that's going to cost them more money. I try to prevent those from happening, but you know, it's sometimes you got to let them do what they want to do.
Yeah. No, I think those are really, really great points. Even the specific example of, I can't count how many times when we're speaking with designer colleagues and they have, of course, there's the situation comes up almost all the time when you're on one track, you think, and the owner comes back with, okay, I want to pivot. And you're like, wait, what? That undoes everything we've done. And it's totally their right and it makes sense. But sometimes that does take place because they went on a 1 week or 2 week vacation, or they went to a friend's house and suddenly they've exposed to different things and they want to throw that other stuff into it, which the more ideas, the better. But I think it is difficult sometimes for the design professionals because you're so locked into creating this perfect artistic puzzle that when someone comes in and says, okay, now I'll throw in a blue piece, you're like, well, how the fuck do I do that?
And that happens.
I know,
and that happens sometimes. And the way we always handle it is like, look, we're looking at the best scenario. You're throwing that firebolt at us. Here's why it's working, why it's not working. At the end of the day, it's up to you. You're going to be the one living in it. So if you want to go for it, it's your call, but you need to understand why it's good or why it's not good. Yeah.
And actually that is an area where we can intercede on your behalf and take a little of the, you know, I'll tell you one thing, the owner does not, they want to protect their relationship with the architect, the owner does, insofar as they don't want to feel like they're second guessing them, so that they'll talk to us about it. And you know, then we can talk to the architect. Sometimes we're like the go-between, or it's like, you know, the kid in the schoolyard who said, "Tell that girl I like her," or whatever, something.
But I think, you know, the importance of that aspect of the role. I mean, it's very important, even though there's a million other things you do as well, because design is such a personal thing for the architect and also for the client. Obviously, it's their home, and it's very easy for things to be taken personally from both sides, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we don't, you know, it's funny. I would say less than 20% of the time, or we do what used to be, you know, considered more traditional homes, like a Palladian or an Italian or a Tudor or, you know, or even a Victorian. But we did this big Palladian villa down in Atherton, and I can mention the architect as in this particular case, it was John Saladino. I think it was the last project he did. And it was, the owner, and it went on for almost 4 years. It's huge. And the owner, every 6 months, they go to Italy and they'd come back and they say, "Oh, we saw this there. Can we change that stairway to," you know, and it was, that's why it went on for 4 years. So
I was wondering, is there...
And, you know, contractors don't like to redo stuff. I don't blame them. It's demoralizing. Even if they're being paid for it, they, you know, after they did something beautiful and then just like tear that out.
Heart-wrenching. I mean, I think you said it earlier too. It's for everyone involved, yourselves, the architect, contract, all the subs. Like, no one is in this game to... Well, first of all, no one's in it to become like billionaires. It's not the case. Everyone's in it for the passion. Everyone's in it to complete built works. Like, it's not satisfying, speaking of for an architect, to do just design in the 3D computer space and never have it built. Even if you get paid, as you said, it's not satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to the interview you did with Josh Adlin, and he was talking about how many projects they design and draw up and that they really are in love with it that don't get built.
Yeah, it happens, especially with large scale works in other offices. I was speaking with a senior where he's basically in charge of the office, and they do a variety of works. And he's like, we've had some people who they're architects within the office, and they haven't had a project built in the last like 7 years. And it's not their fault, of course. It's not anyone's fault. It's just they happen to end up on projects that go forward for 2 years and then they get canned.
Yeah.
And it's such a strange, it's not uncommon also, but when you think about it, it's a very bizarre thing to go throughout an existence as an architect, but then not have, be fortunate and be lucky to have projects get built.
Yeah, I'll tell you one other thing we do that architects and architects don't want to do and contractors are not happy about us doing is we're really good on punch lists.
Love punch lists.
Yeah, I mean, what architect wants to spend 6 months doing, hammering the contractor for a punch list?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe you guys enjoy that, but
it satisfies the part of us that are kind of like OCD, but it's really tough to come back to a person repeatedly and keep asking for things, even if it's in your right to do so,
Yeah.
We're really good at that. We pay attention to it. We put together it on either Bluebeam, PlanGrid, with the architect, of course. Yeah. But, the architect doesn't really care that, behind the refrigerator, they didn't paint the damn wall or something,
Do you guys ever take on projects that are not residential?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we always try to have at least 1 or 2 or 3 commercials projects going just for fun. Mm-hmm. I've got this project where we're doing a big solar roofing project in a huge building in Fremont for the Chronicle newspaper built.
Wow.
And that's kind of fun to keep my thing in it. But our clients actually on occasion ask us to do something out of the blue because they like our ability to project manage, so to speak. Yeah. So I'm involved in rebuilding one of the first corporate airplanes that Howard Hughes had. It's a Mitchell B-25 bomber, and we've taken it from where it was a heap of junk down in a field, and now it's about a year away from going to Oshkosh or so, maybe a little more than a year. And it's been super fun.
But it's just an airplane, not a structure to house an airplane.
Twin engine, used to be a bomber during World War II.
Whoa!
And there's I've been exposed to this whole world of warbirds. It's a billionaire's hobby.
I see.
And it's all over the country. And at certain times we've had parts of this planes in Texas and Arkansas, Minnesota, all over the place. And I have another client that I'm doing a project for in French Polynesia where he owns a property that's in this landlocked lagoon. So I'm into this almost 5 years, and I'm going to complete it hopefully in April, where we've gone through all the process to put in a channel from the ocean to provide fresh water. And then we're working with the biologists, marine biologists, and also the high school kids in Bora Bora to put together a coral restoration. And then we want to take that on the road. Wow. So, I mean, that's the kind of things we get to be involved in. And
I wasn't expecting that. That's very different.
Need for flying and scuba diving.
Yeah, I was expecting offices or boring things, but you have bomber and Bora Bora.
But you're a pilot. You fly as well.
I do. I mean, I'm not very active in it, but I'm hoping that I can get behind the controls of that B-25.
Oh, that would be amazing. That'd be really cool.
Oh, one of my other questions I wanted to ask is, what is your favorite part of your job? What is the thing that just keeps you going, despite being the bearer of bad news and dealing with all the stress and everybody's concern? Like, what is the thing?
Okay, well, now it's confession time. I love great architecture. I've been surrounded it my whole life, but I'm not one of those builders or architects who just look at that. So that just puts me in a state of awe, and I can be in a state of awe with it, but it isn't what what I like is I like to go out and hear about a client who wants something, contact them, get them educated as to what we can do, find out what they want, seal the deal, and then put together the team. And then from then on, it's kind of rote, it's rote, so to speak. And right. It's less fun, although I'm not bad at it, but I love those early days. It's probably the fly fisherman in me.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, got one. Somebody's got to do that for the firm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, it makes sense if that's what drives you. That makes total sense. Basically, yeah.
Do you guys actually?
But I want to do a shout out. My partners Steve and Tom are really good, and they have a great client base. Actually, they have names in their client base that are far more prominent, wealthier, and more famous than mine these days. So
I would expect so. Do you guys have a number of projects that you're limiting, like how many you take on?
Well, it depends on how many project managers we can have that at any one time. The rule of thumb is, and it depends on the size, because there are projects where we've had a single team, project manager and APM, on one project for several years, and that was it. But generally speaking, a project manager and APM can do between 3 and 5 projects at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And we typically have, and I'm going to say, like in the early phases where it's, you're just picking the architect and all that stuff, or to the very end when you're doing punch lists, eliminating those two, which can go on for months and months.
Yeah.
But when you're in the thick of it, where you're really doing, CD drawings all the way to building the job and moving the client in, I would say that our sweet spot is around 25 projects.
That's a lot.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
We've had more, but that's probably our good running total.
So for clients who are, again, starting off on a project, what advice would you give them in terms of choosing a contractor? Aside from just going with the ones you'd recommend, like what would be the aspects that clients should look out for? Because that's obviously a big choice, and I guess in some ways it might be even harder than selecting an architect, because if you like the architect's work or you get along in terms of the personality and design, that kind of is sometimes a big majority of why you go with them. But for a contractor, how would you know whether or not they're good quality and organized and whatever else?
That is a great question, because, and I'm going to ruffle some feathers here, but I wouldn't automatically go with the architect's favorite contractor.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, the reason is that may be a good fit, because, and the architect is obviously wanting to work with somebody that understands his style, their style, her style, whatever it is that they're going to build. But we look at it from the perspective of the history, the health of the contractor, meaning not the physics, well, that too, but the health of the company, because we hear about companies that are on the ropes sometimes, and and we don't want a contractor, and they'll probably give a low bid, and so they'd be preferred. But you know what? They go out of business midway through your job. That is the most expensive mistake you can possibly make. Also, as you know, it's not the contractor, it's the superintendent and partly the project manager you're going to get, and their experience and how they are to work with. And that's why I say, if I hear a contractor's, full up, and yet they're still bidding this job, that means we're going to get a superintendent or 2 superintendents, depending on the size of the job, who they may not have had experience with, and
right.
that's a non-starter from my point of view. So first of all, they got to get to know the contractor. So I would have, I insist that they go see several projects that the contractor has built. And I like to go too, because sometimes a contractor, I have a really trained eye for construction details, and my eye just goes right to it.
I'm sure contractors love when you come by their job site.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't see something, that's a miracle. And they're too good, actually. They should. So I just want to, get a sense of how they build, and also to talk to the people who've enjoyed it. Obviously a contractor is not going to send you to somebody that they're in a lawsuit with or something,
Right.
But it's important to, and we typically suggest that they talk to 2 or 3 contractors. The days of doing stipulated sum, fixed cost, detailed bids, that just doesn't happen anymore. That, it may happen on a very rare occasion.
Yeah.
But these days, you get proposals from contractors, as you know, that are basically, their overhead and profit. They take a look at the job. They give you an estimated timeline. We ask for their running general conditions, their daily burn rate, that kind of a thing. And then we ask for them for a rough budget, meaning that, some as simple as the square footage, or some might just get into it and do a line item budget, but it is only a rough order of magnitude budget at best. So we don't hold that, if somebody comes in at 10 million and somebody's at 15 million and somebody's at 20, that's not really meaningful towards the selection of the contractor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they have to get to know the contractor, and they have to get to know the contractor has to make a commitment to the superintendent. Unfortunately, that superintendent could quit at any point in time. But if he's been with the company for 10 years or 15 years, and he brags about how much he loves working for the company, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we'll see superintendents that we really liked working with, and they'll jump to another company. And then that will shift us to considering that other company.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I just recently had that happen. So
it's interesting how the actual specific member of that company make the company interesting or not, versus, let's say, an architecture office, which is oftentimes more like the name above the door, like, the head person of that office that matters most than the project managers or the designers on it.
Because I guarantee that the aspect of the point you made about the superintendent is not something that most people would think of.
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I made back, I don't know, 10 years ago, we built this very complex, very large project in Hillsborough. And it was the first time we had used this contractor. And it went so smooth. The superintendent, the sub-superintendent, the project engineer, they were all fantastic. And before that project was over, we were looking at another project, and the guy said, I want this other project. And we put him on that project, and it was a whole different team, and it was a nightmare.
Oh,
and I think it was a nightmare for him too.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. And we actually put into the contract, when we negotiate contracts, that they have to put the team that they're going to put on the contract in the contract. And if that team leaves, we have the right of refusal on the person they're replacing them with.
Wow. Interesting.
Wow. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
You should add that into your contract in the
future. I don't know. People are afraid of our contract. I'm like, no, don't be afraid of a thorough contract. It actually is better for everybody.
It is better for everybody.
Yeah. What would you say is the most challenging part of your job?
Well, delivering disappointing news keeps me awake at night. That's for sure. And disappointing news, I'm inclined to be of the temperament that the buck stops here. So I really take it seriously, probably too much. I mean, it's not been good for my mental health. But that's tough. And I mean, I've had a meeting with this contractor yesterday about the fact that they're hiding the disappointing news about the schedule. We ask them for a revised schedule every month. They give us a revised schedule, and I'm telling them, guys, the place is not even close to being sheetrocked. And once it's sheetrocked, best case scenario, 10, 11 months. Mm-hmm. And right now, you're down to 10, 11 months right now. And so we all know it's not going to happen. So we got to deliver the news, and it's going to crush the client. But, you know, I want it in writing from you before I go in and pull off the Band-Aid. Yeah. So, you know, that's something I'm not looking forward to.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, is there anything you do to kind of reset yourself to be calm, to maintain the mental health status?
Fly fishing.
Fly fishing.
Well, I'm actually, I don't want to say I'm disciplined, but I'm very disciplined in the sense that I have a practice. I get up every morning before I look at my email, before I do anything. I journal, I meditate, and I Wim Hof breathe.
Wim Hof, really?
And then I step into an ice cold shower.
Yep.
And that keeps me sane, I think.
Wim Hof is a very interesting person.
He is an interesting person. I would kind of like to meet him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Without having to pay $10,000.
Yeah, maybe you can join him on one of his swimming endeavors where he swims underneath the ice and his eyes freeze from the distance that he free swims. I mean, that guy is on another level.
He's an alien.
You know, just to go off on a tangent, I just read a book about people that free dive down to several hundred feet, if not like 500, 600, 700 feet. Unbelievable. But they've discovered that the human body actually has the same thing as a dolphin or a seal, and you just don't know it because you never get down to those depths or put your body under that sort of stress. Mm-hmm. And the body will then, your heart changes, your blood flow changes, and all those kind of things. So it's kind of, I'm all into like testing the margins within reason, and so that's why I like Wim Hof.
Yeah, impressive individual.
Yeah.
The last question for me is, what is your favorite type of project to undertake?
Well, I like ones that, you know, I'm going to say I like ones with teams that I like to work with, therefore I've had experience with them. Mm-hmm. And it's great if I am, you know, kind of have a sense of the architecture such that I like the architecture. That makes it more fun. Mm-hmm. I also like ones that are also adventurous and trying something new, which is most of our projects are, you know, I haven't met an architect yet who wants to rinse and repeat. You know, they always want to try something new. And that's always exciting to me. I'm actually excited about this new thing with where we're kind of make these homes so that they have this ability to have air that is breathable at all times. Mm-hmm. I'm not so excited about the safe room thing and the paranoia around it. But it is what it is.
Yeah, those have become very popular.
Yeah. My last question is, do you have a favorite building?
Okay, let me see. I was asked this by my partners the other day. You know, I kind of have a favorite house, and I've actually seen it. And I am a fan of. I'm not a fan of much of Frank Lloyd Wright, but Falling Water is one of. I've seen that in person, and that is just takes your breath away.
I would agree. Yeah, we saw it too a few years ago, and
it's pretty mind blowing.
I mean, we're a little bit biased. We do like his work, but that piece of architecture.
I like his work. I just don't like his roofs leaking.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
single pane too.
Well, that's what happened with the Johnson Wax headquarters or whatever the truck
Yeah.
was.
Absolutely. Yeah. Philip Glass.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, no, that's the
Glass House.
that's a composer, but the architect who did that. Yeah.
But it looks really cool.
No.
Yeah. That it does. I'm kind of mixed on the Salesforce Tower, for example. I didn't really like the fact that it's so big, and you could even say that it might be phallic, but I do like the texture on it. They did achieve that texture. I'm not that crazy about the dancing lights, though.
I don't know what Pelly Clark Pelly feels like, but I can't imagine that would have been their first choice either. There's bits. Yeah. It's kind of more common these days for towers to have lighting designers that just make it into a Las Vegas kind of show. Which
or maybe it's like an adaptation of the Empire State Building, changing color depending on events. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Louis Kahn's work.
Also. Oh, okay.
The brick.
The brick. What does the brick want to be?
Yeah.
David Whiteside, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for taking the time again to be on the show. This was great.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love talking about this business, and especially with people that have experience in it, and it's great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please support our show by hitting that subscribe button and liking and commenting on our videos.
You can also find us on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're mostly on Instagram. And you can reach out to the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can send a text message or leave a voicemail. If you have any reaction to this recording, any questions you might have, or guest suggestion, feel free to send it our way.
Cool. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.